Hello students, today we are going to deal with the chapter Respiration and Circulation. It is chapter number 8 in your 12th standard textbook. In 11th already you have studied about respiration, that was specifically cellular respiration, the aerobic, anaerobic respiration. Here we are going to study about the physiology, morphology, anatomy of respiration of animals. Okay, now to start with, what is respiration? If I ask a primary standard student, he will simply say that taking in of oxygen and giving out of CO2. Okay, that's true, but then that is not complete. If you take in oxygen, why do you need oxygen? First of all, here is the answer. This equation answers it all. Here you can see that the food product which is we are taking in and that is broken down into simpler substances like glucose, the organic substance, organic compound, that is oxidized with the help of the oxygen which we inhale, and then it breaks down into CO2 and water. And the main product which we get here is the energy. Okay, here you can see that one molecule of glucose is giving rise to 38 molecules of ATP. ATP is the energy which we need for all our metabolic processes. So here is the definition of respiration. It is a biochemical process of oxidation of organic compound. Organic compound means compound having carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in an orderly manner for the liberation of chemical energy in the form of ATP. You all know the full form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So here we summarize that oxidation of the organic compound to give rise to CO2, water and energy in the form of ATP is the main process of respiration. Now, if we respire, the respiratory surface should have certain important features. These important features are, it should have a large surface area. The surface area should be quite large. It should be thin and it should be highly vascular. What do you mean by vascular? It should be richly supplied with blood vessels. It should be richly supplied with blood vessels. थर्ड, इट शुड बी मॉइस्ट. आपको पता है जब हम एयर भी अंदर लेते हैं तो अंदर जाके उसमें थोड़ी सी नमी आती है और वो moist बनता है. So these are the three features. It should have a large surface area, it should be vascular and thin, and it should be moist. This is the criteria for the respiratory surface to function. Now, before going to the human respiratory system, we should see what are the different respiratory surfaces or organs in the different animals, starting from non-chordates to chordates. So here they have, this is the table which has been taken from your textbook. In it, it starts with protists, the eukaryotic organisms, unicellular, and then it goes to sponges. Sponges comes in the next phylum, Porifera. Then they have the coelentrates, Hydra. So these are aquatic forms and they respire by the diffusion of through the plasma membrane. Next comes the platyhelminths. They are the flatworms, as you know, or the annelids. These are the segmented worm, the earthworm being the most commonest example. They are aquatic or semi-aquatic and they also respire through their general body surface and the plasma membrane. Then comes the arthropods. In arthropods, there are various classes. The first one being the insects. They are the insecta class. They are terrestrial. Now the insects, they are terrestrial. They are aquatic, everyone. But if they are terrestrial, they have the tracheal tubes and spiracles. You must be remembering the cockroach example. Then there are spiders or the scorpions. They have the book lungs. Actually, these are the lungs which are in the form of the plates or the sheets, and they look like book pages, and hence the name book lungs. Or then the living fossil, limulus. It has got gill-like structure, which is book gill. Then you have the chordates. In that you see that there is a tadpole. Tadpole is aquatic, so it is having external gills for respiration. Then you have fishes. They are aquatic. You all know that they respire by the gills. Okay. Then the first terrestrial animal class, that is reptiles. Then you have birds and mammals. They are terrestrial and they respire by lungs. Turtles, they respire by the cloacal respiration because they have a hard shell. So that being the exception. Otherwise, you have seen here, sorry, complete sequence of the animals, how the respiratory organs are there in different phylums and classes. Now we go to the human respiratory system. Human respiratory system involves various processes, the most important being the inspiration, then the expiration, and then the exchange of gases in the lungs. Exchange of gases takes place in the lungs, and then they are transported from the blood to the lungs, and then to the lungs. From there it goes to the tissues and to the different parts of our body. Now how this is transferred, which we'll be seeing in the next diagram. Here the respiratory tract has been divided into, for our convenience study, it has been divided into upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. As you can see the different organs, the upper respiratory tract has nasal cavity, the nose, and then that leads to the nasal cavity. Then you have pharynx, and then you have larynx. A part of larynx is also there in the lower respiratory tract, and then the next parts of the lower respiratory tract being trachea, the bronchi which are present there, and then the main parts which are the lungs. This is the sequence which you should be knowing, that the tract is how it is moving. From the nose it is going to the nasal cavity, then pharynx, then larynx, trachea, primary bronchi, and lungs. Okay, now to study in detail you can just see the diagram which is there in your text here. Now here you can see there is the mouth, above that there is the nose. In the nose, nostril is there, and then it is leading to the nasal cavity. From here it is going to nasal cavity. From nasal cavity it is going into the pharynx. Now this pharynx is a common passage for the air and food. Okay. Now from the pharynx it leads to the larynx. Now here you can see this is the food pipe in blue which is going, and in the purple there it is the larynx. So this pharynx leads to larynx, and then larynx leads to the trachea. And this trachea further divides into two parts, the bronchus, left and right, and then these bronchi, right bronchi as you can see here, and then they enter into the lung, the right lung and the left lung. And these bronchi further divide into primary, secondary, tertiary, and lastly they have the air sacs where the exchange of gases takes place. Okay. Now we are going to study each of these parts and their roles and how they are having the lining of the different types of cells in detail. We start with the nose now. Now nose, the nasal cavity which is there, you can see it is divided into left and right chambers by a mesoethmoid cartilage. The cartilage splits it into two chambers, right? And then it moves inside this nasal chamber. The first part is the vestibule. Then it moves inside into the nasal cavity here, and nasal cavity, and then this nasal cavity leads to the next part. Okay, so first part is the vestibule. The vestibule, as you can see here, it's been written. The first part is the vestibule where the air enters and you are able to trap the different dust particles or the air particles which are having unwanted material in it. There it is trapped in the vestibule. Okay, so the entry is called as the vestibule. Then vestibule leads to the next part, which is the nasal cavity here. This is the nasal cavity. The air dust particles are trapped here with the help of the hairs present. Then it goes into the nasal cavity. Here the air is little bit warmed up and it is moistened. Okay, and from here it moves into the next part, which is the olfactory part. Olfactory part is where you can sense the smell of the thing which you have taken, sensed it. That it can be a pleasant odor, it can be a dirty odor, a pungent smell, it can be a perfume, whatever it is. Here is the olfactory part where you can smell it. Okay, the olfactory cells, the sensory cells are present here where you can sense it, and then the air goes into the pharynx. Okay, so three parts are the vestibule, then you have the nasal cavity part, and third is the olfactory part. Now from there it leads to the pharynx. Now we will see the pharynx. As you have seen, this is the nasal cavity. It's leading into the pharynx. For our easier study, this pharynx has been divided into three parts. Okay, that is the first part, which is from the nasal part, nasal cavity. It is leading into the chamber, which is nasopharynx. Okay, now this nasopharynx is the uppermost part. That leads into the second part, which is the oropharynx. Oropharynx is the second part, common passage for the food and air. Okay, now as you can see, in between these two parts there is the palate here. What is palate? The hard palate. ऊपर की टालू जो हम बोलते हैं उसको हम हार्ड पैलेट बोलते हैं, तो उसका बोन जो पीछे तक आ रहा है वो ये नेसोफैरिंक्स और ओरोफैरिंक्स के बीच में प्रेजेंट है ये पैलेट बोन. Okay, then the oropharynx leads to the hypopharynx, or you can also say laryngopharynx. Larynx को entry होती है वहां से, so that is the last part. That is the hypopharynx or the laryngopharynx as it is mentioned in your text. And also there is a part, there's the tonsils are also present here. A pair of the glands which are there are called as the tonsils. Okay, so pharynx is there. It is divided into nasopharynx, oropharynx and hypopharynx or laryngopharynx. Now next part is the larynx. Pharynx leads into the voice box, which is the larynx. Okay, now as you know, larynx is the voice area. Above that was the pharynx, which was the common area for the food and the air. So that common area has a flap-like structure which is called as the epiglottis, and the opening of the pharynx into the larynx is called as the glottis. So over this glottis there is the epiglottis, which is a flap-like structure. It closes the larynx when you get the food swallowed into your food pipe, so that the food is prevented from growing into the voice area. Now this larynx, it starts from the hyoid bone. Hyoid bone is at the base of the tongue. So it starts from the hyoid bone and is present up to the start of the trachea. So this is the voice box. Now this voice box is a hollow tubular structure. It is made up of cartilage plates, and then it is internally lined by elastic vocal cords. Okay, there are pair of folds which are called as the vocal cords, and when जब हमारी air उसमें टकराती है, उसमें साथ में modulations होते हैं हमारे इसके teeth के, lips के, tongue के, तो ये सब मिलके आवाज बनती है. So vocal cords are there, hence it is called as the voice box. Here there is the Adam's apple, which is seen in the puberty in the males as a secondary sexual character. Okay, so this is the larynx. And main things which you should know is that the opening is guarded by epiglottis and there are vocal cords present in the larynx. Okay. Next we go into the further part. This larynx, as you can see here, is continued into the trachea. This trachea is 10-12 centimeters long area, a tube-like structure which is supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings. As you can see here, 16 to 20 C-shaped cartilaginous rings are there, which are open at one end. So it is called as incomplete cartilaginous rings. These continue later as the trachea branches into the main bronchi, primary bronchi, right and left. These are seen here also. But then later, when these trachea divide into primary bronchi, and then these primary bronchi when move into the secondary bronchi, and these secondary bronchi into tertiary bronchi and terminal bronchi, these areas do not have these cartilaginous rings. Okay, so this is the larynx area. Larynx leads to the trachea. Trachea leads to the primary bronchi, which are having C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Later it moves into primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi. Here you can see the tertiary bronchi is there, and last is the terminal bronchi, which is the respiratory bronchi. Now, next comes the main part, which is the lungs. As you can see, they are one pair of spongy elastic lungs, and they are present in our upper cavity, which is called as the thoracic cavity. Okay, the upper cavity is called as the thoracic cavity. Now this cavity is having a pair of lungs, and these lungs are enclosed in two membranes. The outer one is called as the parietal membrane. The inner one is called as the visceral membrane. Okay, in between these two is filled the fluid which is called as the pleural fluid. This pleural fluid is secreted by these two membranes, as well as it is enclosed in these two membranes, and it is a lubricating fluid there. Okay, so this comes to what is the basic structure, how it is enclosed. It is a vital organ, it has to be protected, so it is enclosed by the two membranes. Then you can see there is a right lung which is larger, and then there is a left lung which is a little smaller. The right lung is larger and it is three lobed, one lobe, two lobe, and this is the third lobe. The left lung is little smaller, it is made up of two lobes, one lobe and two lobed. Here also you can see this is the trachea. It is dividing into the main right stem bronchus and the left bronchus. These bronchi are further dividing into primary, secondary and then tertiary bronchi. And if we see one of the tertiary bronchi, it is lined by it is filled, attached to a bunch of grape-like structure which are called as the alveoli, for which we'll be seeing it in the next slide here. This is the terminal bronchi, the last bronchi where we left the previous slide, and this leads to the bunch of grapes, as you can see here, very thin walled structures. These are called as the alveoli. Each terminal bronchiole will be having 10-12 alveoli. Each alveoli will be having a number of alveolar sacs. In all, there are about 700 million alveoli present in the lungs. You must be remembering, initially I told you the surface area should be large. So this is the reason so many airbags are there here, and they increase the surface area. And third most important point is that they are vascular. As I told you, vascular means supplied with blood vessels. So here you can see these are the red blood vessels which are coming, and they are covering this alveoli here. So this is very important because this is the main structure where the exchange of gas is taking place. The oxygen which comes here is taken in by these capillaries, and the CO2 which is coming from the different tissues is moved out from these capillaries into the alveolus. So they are highly thin structures which are the main area for gas exchange. Okay. The last part which we come to is for the organs of respiration is diaphragm. Okay. Now this diaphragm is a septal structure. It is a septum which is separating the upper thoracic cavity from the lower abdominal. This is the upper cavity which is thoracic, and this is the lower which is abdominal cavity. So this diaphragm usually is dome shaped, but then it can become flattened during the respiratory process when it contracts, with the process which we'll be seeing in the latest stages, where we'll be studying the different mechanism. There we'll be studying about the contraction and relaxation of diaphragm. So here we summarize with this what all we have studied today. What is the need for respiration? What is the formula? What is the complete equation which describes the respiration along with its definition? And then we see the different organs of respiration in different phylums and classes leading to the human respiratory system. And in human respiratory system, which we have dealt with each of the parts of the respiratory system, starting from nose up to the diaphragm. In the next video, we'll be studying with the mechanism of respiration. Okay. Thank you, students, for being so patient and listening properly.